Okay, we'll get started for our board. Well, welcome to the regular board meeting of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors for Tuesday, January 29th. You join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call.
Supervisor Pine?
Here.
Supervisor Groom?
Present.
Supervisor Slocum?
Here.
Supervisor Tissier? President Horsley.
Here. And now it's time for public comment for items that are not on the regular agenda, and we have one speaker, Martin Fox.
Good morning, President Horsley,
Morning.
honorable members of the board, Mr. Sacco, Mr. Byers, and my fellow veterans, Supervisor Slocum and Mr. Maltby. Thank you for your service to the county. A 28-year-old adult, Ryan Cox, that lived with his parents at 7528 Frederickson Lane in Dublin, less than 1,000 feet away from an elementary school, was shot last Friday morning at 9:30 after his father, Blaine Cox, made his fourth or fifth call to 911 for help because Ryan was punching holes in the wall. Ryan Cox's repeated episodes of erratic behavior was the reason why law enforcement officers had been to his residence 3 or 4 times before a uniformed sheriff's deputy wearing a gun drew it and fired it in what will undoubtedly be found a justifiable assault with a deadly weapon. Ryan was brandishing a Bowie knife. What is not justifiable is Alameda County's behavioral health services officers' policy of responding to a mental health crisis that could have been easily and inexpensively avoided had the public health officer recommended the county's Board of Supervisors vote to implement assisted outpatient treatment, known in California as Laura's Law, instead of misstating the terms of the Lantern and Petrus Short Act and misrepresenting the effectiveness and the economy of assisted outpatient treatment. Please implement Laura's Law in San Mateo County and serve as an example for Alameda County's Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is to set the agenda in the consent agenda. Any items?
Move approval.
Mr. President, if I may, our clerk brought to my attention 2 changes that need to be made to 2 of the consent items in the title. There are apparently a couple of errors in the title of the resolutions. The errors are only in the title, but the board memorandum and the contracts are correct. But I would suggest a couple of changes. In item number 25, it should read, resolution authorizing an agreement with Unity Care Group, Inc., for the Independent Living Skills Program for the term of January 1st, 2013 through June 30th, 2015 in the amount of $335,000. And again, that title would be consistent with the board memo and the, as well as the contract. And then the second change would be to item number 26. It should read, resolution authorizing a revenue agreement from Envision Shelter Network to the County of San Mateo Vocational Rehabilitation Services Catering Connection to provide healthy dinner meals to families in transitional housing and weekly cooking demonstrations commencing on January 29, 2013 and ongoing until canceled by either party. The revenue to the county in the first 3 years is anticipated to be $329,184. So those are a couple of changes I would submit.
Okay, with those changes, I'll move approval.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, done. And the first presentation is a presentation and commendation to Elaine Swanson, Elizabeth Swanson, and Redeemer Lutheran Church for their efforts on behalf of the Children's Fund. Supervisor Adrian Tessier.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my pleasure this morning to acknowledge the work of some very devoted community members, Elizabeth and Elaine Swanson and the Redeemer Lutheran Church for their 20 years of service with the Teddy Bear Drive in San Mateo County. You'll note our visitors in the front row here. This project began in 1993 by Della Newmeyer, a member of the Redeemer Lutheran Church in Redwood City. The goal was to obtain teddy bears for children that have the most need in San Mateo County, especially those youth in the foster care system. A total of 125 bears were collected on the first year, which were donated by congregation members. In 1997, Elizabeth and Elaine Swanson took over the Teddy Bear Drive. The Teddy Bear Drive is a partnership amongst the Swanson sisters, Pastor Drager, and the Congregation of Redeemer Lutheran Church. Last year, they collected 1,134 bears by raising funds through bake sales and shopping for teddy bears at discount prices. The Swanson sisters personally mend any bears that are injured, and with the help of their sister Evelyn Hansen, they store the teddy bears throughout the year in their homes. Al Talia, also known as Mr. Daly City, was with the Children's Fund Advisory Board, was also involved with visiting and talking to the congregation about the Children's Fund and the destination of the homes for these bears. Every December, the teddy bears are brought to the Redeemer Lutheran Church and stay there for 3 weeks for all to see. Are we going to have these here for 3 weeks so we can? They get counted in the pews and have their picture taken on the altar, as you can see in the photos behind me. Finally, they are picked up by the Children's Fund for inclusion in their gifts for the holidays and are given to children and community groups throughout the year. To date, 16,266 bears have been collected. That means thousands of children in San Mateo County have received these beautiful teddy bears, providing comfort and companionship to the children in need. Before I present some commendations to Elizabeth and Elaine Swanson and Pastor Drager, I'd like to ask Chief Ed Woods from the Chief of the City of Burlingame Police Department, and he's also the Chair of the Children's Fund Advisory Board, and he wanted to say a few words. Good morning, Ed.
Morning, President Horsley, members of the board, Mr. Maltby, Mr. Byers. On behalf of the Children's Fund, I wish to acknowledge the 25 years of dedication and incredible work that has been provided by Elizabeth and Elaine Swanson in the Redeemer Lutheran Church in Redwood City with the Teddy Bear Drive here in San Mateo County. This Teddy Bear Drive is a very important component of the Children's Fund Holiday Gift Drive, and the inclusion of the bears with the gifts adds a special personal touch. The Children's Fund has continued throughout the years through the generosity of committed community donors such as the Swanson Sisters and the Redeemer Lutheran Church, including the school children there who donate bears. They're all leaders in the community, and we are truly grateful for their caring nature to our children in San Mateo County. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to recognize Supervisor Tissier and the entire board for supporting the Children's Fund. With your support, we are one of very few nonprofits who can say 100% of every donation goes back out to those in need. There are no hidden administrative costs. Your support makes a tremendous difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Then I'd like to ask Elizabeth and Elaine Swanson and Pastor Drager if they would join me up here at the podium.
As unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I will speak in behalf of the ladies. I know that they have served very well, and I want to thank you, honorable supervisors, and thank the staff for recognizing their work. They are diligent servants behind the scenes. And there's some people who like the limelight and others shun it. They are in that latter category, but the work they do behind the scenes is invaluable to us. We could not raise 16,000 teddy bears over these last 20 years without their loving support, their dedication. And ladies, you done good.
Yeah.
And thank you, supervisors.
Thanks again to all of you, the Swanson Sisters, Pastor, and all of you, including Al, and the Human Service Agency does a tremendous job and did a fabulous job again this year with the children. So it makes a huge difference to the children in our community. So thank you.
It's good to see Al Telia as well, who's been involved in this for many, many years and done a fabulous job. So thanks for all your dedication, Al. Do you want comments? Yes.
Just a quick comment and maybe an opportunity for a collaboration. Thank you again for your terrific work. And it also reminds me that our new hockey team that plays out of Daly City, the San Francisco Bulls, they have started a tradition around the holiday season where after the first goal, everyone throws teddy bears onto the ice. And it's really quite a spectacle. So maybe there's a chance to work together.
Go scoop them up after they go out there.
What many of you don't know is that Dave actually had aspirations of being a professional hockey player, but that was when he was 12 years old. The next presentation, thanks very much. The next presentation is to a couple of detectives from the Sheriff's Department. It's the Firearms Compliance Unit, and this is the Hammerman Award. And Barbara Hammerman was a lieutenant in San Mateo Police, and I think most of us who had served with her recognize that she had incredible dedication to combating domestic violence, and it was an incredibly charismatic personality, and we lost her way too soon. In any case, I'm particularly proud of the Firearms Compliance Unit. It was Detective John Kovac and Andy Armando, who, when you took a look at these resolutions, they have really done a phenomenal job of reviewing over about 1,300 restraining orders issued in San Mateo County, and they've seized or facilitated over 350 guns. Actually, it specifically says 349 firearms, which is rather remarkable. Is what happens in a domestic violence case is that the perpetrator is supposed to turn over all of his, mostly men, unfortunately, but their firearms, and they sometimes do, but sometimes do not, and as a consequence, sometimes really bad things happen as a consequence. So what the two detectives have done is make sure that those firearms surrender orders are in fact enforced, and have done really a phenomenal job. And one of the great examples of the work that this team did had to do with a victim of domestic violence, and it was another agency in somebody else's jurisdiction. In that case, somehow when they were reviewing the case records, the detectives discovered that it looked like there was in fact some guns that should have been seized. In that case, they met with this victim, they took appropriate steps to increase her safety, and they proactively investigated the threats. I think they actually probably prevented a tragedy. And I know when I heard it, and I was at the time, one of my committee assignments was a domestic violence counsel, and we heard about this particular case. We were extremely impressed with their dedication, the follow through. So I was incredibly impressed and really proud of our Sheriff's Department for the job that the Firearms Compliance Unit has done. So these two detectives have gone above and beyond. I think it's really a model for Sheriff's Department police agencies throughout the state. And by the way, it's also a collaboration between the Police Chiefs and Sheriff Association, as well as the DA, the Probation Department. And it was actually started in 2006, and I was still the sheriff at the time, and I worked with Supervisor Mark Church on this program, so I'm really proud. I think the sheriff has done an even better job than I ever thought of, and so I really commend Sheriff Greg Monks and his entire team. I'd like to call Chief Susan Mannheimer to the podium.
Thank you, President, Retired Sheriff Horsley, members of the board, Mr. Maltby, Mr. Byers, and the public. Just a brief comment or two about Barbara Hammerman, for whom this award was named and whose legacy, I think, has ensured that domestic violence in our county is as proactive and forward and advocates as much as we can for those who are victims of domestic violence. In my career, and many others sitting in law enforcement, and certainly in yours, President, our responses range from take a walk around the block. He didn't really mean to hit you. Captain, we booked him, but I think he's going to get out pretty soon. I don't know how to protect the family. Gee, Sarge, what should we do with the kids? I don't know. Is there any grandparents or neighbors around? I mean, really it took tragedies and it took forward-thinking officers and advocates and community-based organizations and county agencies to make sure that we have this wraparound umbrella that we now have. Barbara Hammerman was one of those early advocates for all the downtrodden. She was, as an officer, an incredible patriot for the underdogs. And I will tell you that early on, she and those in this county who recognized the violence and the trauma that domestic violence plays in a dating relationship, in a family, and on the community at risk around them, really put in one of the first of the domestic violence response protocols, partnered early with organizations such as CORA, and ensured that our county was as protected as we could for those victims and for those who would perpetrate that violence. And I am just proud to stand up here. Frances Grunder, her partner, is here in the audience today. Barbara has done so much for this county. She, in fact, was on the State Attorney General's task force on domestic violence when we recognized there were still gaps. And she was one of the ones who recognized that this armed and prohibited clause that the court actually imposes on the suspects who are convicted of domestic violence really doesn't have any enforcement arm out in the community. And so that is why, as you well know, and iterated that domestic violence firearms prohibited. In fact, today in the state legislature, they are talking about how we need to get more funding for just those efforts. So on behalf of Barb Hammerman and everyone here who were the early adopters of domestic violence response protocols, thank you very much for ensuring that her legacy and commitment extends to all of the community.
Thank you, Chief. And I'd like to ask Melissa Lukens, who's the executive director for CORA, who is also one of the partners in the founding of the Firearms Compliance Unit.
Good morning. Thank you. I also want to especially thank you, Supervisor Horsley, for your recent leadership on the DV Council, and I look forward to the ongoing work with Supervisor Slocum with regard to the very kind of work that this award exemplifies in the way of coordinated community response that's victim-centered and proactive. This celebration provides one of the best examples of collaborative response, I think, sort of the highest order, when law enforcement and the district attorney's office and other entities engage in taking the victim seriously, and shows how far we've come in terms of our acknowledgement of this as a human rights issue. The Firearms Compliance Unit exemplifies it as well and bridges the gap between many of the entities and improves victim safety and services, and also holds batters accountable. And having also known Lieutenant Hammerman personally, as many of you have, I can say that it reflects her dogged determination toward action by enforcing gun control and removing firearms from those who shouldn't have them. And these awardees, Detective Kovac and Armando, their actions exemplify her victim-centered approach, and if you will, her take-no-prisoners approach to domestic violence. I want to tell you the story just briefly so that we can understand what led to this, if you don't mind. A woman we will call Jeanette fled with her 2 young sons to San Mateo County from San Joaquin County. Her husband, convicted of violence against her, had a temporary restraining order and was on probation. He'd recently tracked her down like an animal after meat to a domestic violence shelter and to a motel where she was trying to hide. And police agencies in San Joaquin County had taken reports, but no one was actively searching for him. And then Jeanette found Cora. And while at our shelter, she received help getting orders of custody and protection for her sons because the CPO that she had only protected her. Our attorney filed the paperwork, and the probation officer, while sympathetic in San Joaquin County, insisted that they lacked the resources to assist with the search despite the bench warrants that had been issued, and no local law enforcement agencies would act. Each department thought the other should assume responsibility, and so Jeanette was essentially still at great risk. Her husband escalated his threats and began to contact their daughter and threaten her to, if she wouldn't disclose her location. He sent pictures of himself holding an automatic weapon, and she felt it was only a matter of time before he killed her and her sons. But those pictures fell into the right hands, and Cora's attorney contacted the San Mateo County's Firearms Compliance Unit for help because as a convicted felon, she knew that he was prohibited from possessing firearms, and the unit took it seriously. They documented the threats and restraining order violations. They used the information Jeanette had about her husband to locate him. And as you said, they set up a pretext meeting and used Jeanette to lure her husband to that place so that they could make that very successful arrest. Now located, the attorney could serve her husband with custody and protection order. She also represented Jeanette's daughter in securing her own restraining order. And the San Mateo County District Attorney filed charges, a long list of charges, including terrorist threats, witness intimidation, restraining order violations, and firearms possession. And as previously convicted felon, he may face life in prison. I just want to add that now safe, she's actually moved from our emergency shelter and has been successfully transferred to our transitional housing and is doing much better. She's back to school and going to work. So this firearms unit, in particular Detective Kovach and Armando, and under the able leadership of Sergeant Gibbons and Sheriff Monks, have done the county very proud. As a result of their attention to the potential lethality of the situation, despite the fact that the perpetrator was from out of the county and other jurisdictions were not taking it seriously, they investigated, they listened to the victim's story, and they took action quickly and unequivocally. We consider them a part of the domestic violence advocacy community. They're open and eager to learn best practices when encountering domestic violence victims. This kind of law enforcement response, this kind of caliber, really validates the victim's fears and makes it more likely that a survivor will participate in the future. They treat it seriously and they understand the nuances of the threats and the seriousness of the violations, and collaboration of this kind keeps concerns of the victims at the forefront and thereby obviously saves lives. And as you indicated, they continue to do this work. Over the last 20 months, these two detectives have seized and facilitated the surrender of so many firearms from those who shouldn't have them. And that means that countless victims and their children are safer because of it. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. It really, yes, Carol?
I wonder, before you recognize the two detectives, if I could say one more word about Barbara Hammerman.
Please do.
You know, I'm from the city of San Mateo, where Barbara was a longtime police officer, and many of the ways that we will overcome domestic violence is through prevention programs. And our San Mateo PAL program that Barbara was very active in, we do so much work with young children and their families. And Barbara's legacy lives through our PAL program, as well as Frances Grunder, who serves on our PAL board. And so this is just a very special day, and I just wanted to say a word about PAL and a word about Frances and continuing Barbara's legacy and her hard work with young people to get them ready for adulthood.
At this point, can I have Detective Kovach and Andy Armando come up to the front, and I'll give you your presentation. Warren, would you hand one of the presentations, because it is your subject, your committee, you're assigned to that committee now?
Just like really briefly to thank the supervisors for this honor, as well as Sheriff Monks. Just like to point out that this has been a team effort, and I just really like to thank the people that I worked with, especially Tulin and Jessica, as well as Sergeant Gibbons for setting this up, and Ginger Balkus, as well as all the other people that have helped us with this. This has been a great teamwork and also very satisfying to take these firearms off the street, and I thank everyone.
Also, thank you very much. I'd just like to thank the fellow detectives. As you can imagine, we don't go out by ourselves to houses to seize guns. So I've been fortunate enough to work with detectives that will drop anything to assist me. I'd especially like to thank Detective Matt Bro, Lissandro Lopez, Hector Acosta, Benjamin Hand, and Bridget Hensley for always being there to assist us to get the job done. We couldn't have done it by ourselves. So thank you.
Well, thanks to all of you, and the Sheriff's Department have done a phenomenal job on that program, as well as others. The next is resolution approving our STARS Award recipients and honorable mentions. So there is a series of them. Let me have Rocio Carrickson come up to the podium.
Good morning, President, members of the board, Mr. Maltby, Mr. Byers, Mr. Sacco. Nice to see you. This morning, I get the privilege of introducing this year's STARS Awards recipients. Momentarily, you'll hear from representatives from 5 outstanding programs that are being recognized by your board. Following their brief presentations, we'll introduce the employee receiving an award for submitting an innovative idea. This year marks the 7th year that we've had the STARS program. Initially, we had 2 award categories, and now we have grown the program to 4 award categories that include a Customer Service Award, a Program Performance Award, a Green Award, and finally, an Employee Suggestion Award. During this year's submission process, we received 11 program entries and 22 suggestions. We had 2 internal review teams evaluate each of the entries based on criteria, which included such things as alignment, ensuring that the program was in alignment with county goals. It demonstrated a contribution to better client outcomes, and also that the program, the outcomes have been sustained for a long period of time. So without further ado, the exceptional and innovative programs receiving recognition by your board today are as follows. For the Customer Service Award, we have the Health Systems Consumer Affairs Program, and the award amount is $5,000. For the Program Performance Award, we have 2 recipients, that's Sheriff's Office Volunteer Forces, and the award amount is $20,000. And HR's Employee Wellness Program, and the award amount is also $20,000. For the Green Award, we have Health Systems Environmental Health Foodware Ordinance Program and Agriculture's Paperless Office Initiative, both receiving $2,500. And finally, we have 3 honorable mentions, which are all in the health system, Get Healthy San Mateo County, Pathways, and Medical Surgical Patient Experience. Now we'll hear from the award-winning programs. We'll begin with Linford Gale from the health system, followed by Pam Gibson from HR, then Christine Coe from the Sheriff's Office, Wayman Wong from Environmental Health, and finally David Long from Agriculture Weights and Measure. At this time, I'll ask Linford to join me here.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors and Mr. Molpe and Mr. Byers and Mr. Sacco. It's an honor and a privilege to have been selected for customer service. This is my team. I could not have no way been able to do the work that is required to do without this dynamite team that I was fortunate to hire each and every one. I've been working for the county now over 9 years here, and I've worked in other county systems. So I have something to compare it to, and San Mateo is one of the best counties I've ever worked in. And to take a department of mental health consumers and family members and give them the charge of taking a lead in welcoming environment and taking all the grievances and complaints from our clients, we were able to solidify that they were legitimate complaints and try to rectify them the best as we could. And our department is actually highly regarded, and under our esteemed leader, Steve Kaplan, we also me and Suzanne Aubrey are part of the exec team. So consumers and family members are taken very seriously in this county. They're listened to, and they're absolutely asked opinions on how to better serve the mental health clients in this county. We were introduced wrongly. We're not the Office of Consumer Affairs. We're the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs. And I just wanted to correct that, because I think that, as I've been taught, families are a very intricate part of the mental health system, and oftentimes are looked upon as not that vital, but they're very vital. And a lot of times they're the silent sufferers who have to watch their loved ones go through this horrible illness. So we have brought the family issue to the forefront in BHRS, and it has been well received in the youth system as well as in the adult system. So I want to introduce Suzanne Aubrey, who is the director of the family services for the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs.
Hi, thanks, Linford. I just want to thank you all for this great honor. We really love working in the county. We love working with behavioral health, and we love working together. We all have lived experience as either a consumer, family member from mental health or substance use issues, and we're just a fantastic team that we really enjoy our work and helping the clients and the families. Thank you.
So I know there's other presentations. I just wanted to introduce Claudia Sajasi, who's our family liaison. She's Spanish speaking, and Heidel Welches, who is our very creative consumer liaison family partner. He's a artist and very spiritual, and he's leading our department, not just our department, our whole system, in spirituality and other types of wellness. So I'm really, really fortunate to have such a great team.
Yeah, good.
And I want to
Nice.
thank you guys for this honor.
Yeah. Don't go anywhere. First of all, I'm going to make a motion to approve the resolution for the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So now I'll give you this presentation here.
I was assuming all of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now we'll hear from Pam Gibson from HR, County Wellness Program.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I'm actually going to be talking about two programs, our Wellness Screening Program and our Thrive Across America program. We've been so very fortunate to receive additional funding from Blue Shield and Kaiser to expand our wellness programs and to offer wellness rewards for our employees. We just finished our second year of wellness screenings and are now stepping back and beginning to look at the ways in which we can try to begin to evaluate our success. So we looked at the group of employees who attended wellness screenings in the first year and the second year, 2011, 2012, specifically those employees who were high risk, people who had high blood pressure, who were diabetic, who had high cholesterol, and to see what things were going on or changes were going on among that group. So I brought my handy dandy little poster here. And you will see, if hopefully, that the bottom line represents 2011. It's a darker line. This is the number of high-risk employees who received wellness screenings in 2011. And then the bar above it is those who, that same group of people, high risk, identified as high risk in 2012. And in almost all the cases, not all, the bar in 2012 is shorter, meaning that there are fewer high-risk people in this cohort group in 2012 than there were in 2011. So what are they doing? They're learning more about their health, they're losing weight, they're participating in exercise programs, they're seeing their doctor, they're seeing our health coach, they're taking healthy actions to improve their health. And this is, again, a very simple but I think very hopefully indicative case of the progress that we hope to make in creating a healthier workforce for our employees. So that was the first one. The second one was Thrive Across America. Thrive Across America is an online exercise program, and Kaiser sponsors it. We gladly accepted their offer to use the program in 2011. And it runs in a way that we encourage people to form teams to get that social support, to encourage physical activity and exercise. We set a goal for 1,500 employees, which is around 30% of our workforce, which was like double of anything that we had ever done before. So we had them join this 10-week challenge, and here are the results. We had 1,467 people register, just short of 1,500. 800 people finished the program, which means they exercised at least 4 days a week, at least 30 minutes a day for that 10-week period. We had 150 teams, 110 of them ended up finishing the program, which meant that all members of their team exercised at least 4 days a week, 30 minutes a day for that 10-week period. Employees logged 3,385,000 minutes of exercise during that 10-week period, which equivalates to 9 revolutions or 9 walks around the earth. When people talked about their participation in the program, from the beginning of the program to the end of the program, 83% of them said that they were now having a regular physical activity program as opposed to what they were doing at the beginning of the program. And 38% of them now indicated that they were exercising at least 30 minutes a day when they were exercising. So we had some really terrific results, and we are going to be doing this program again this year. We're launching on the 18th of March. It will begin in the mid-April. Teams will be forming. We think there's a lovely team here that might be able to go and join in this year's program. But again, it's a great opportunity. Employees are waiting for it, and they're raring to go. And so just a reflection about the STARS Award. We're just so very delighted to be recognized. And I wanted to let you know that with these funds, I will be giving half of the funds to the County Wellness Committee to use for their work this calendar year. And the other half of the funds will go to funding this year's Thrive Across America program. So thank you very much for this honor.
We would do it as a team, except it would be a Brown Act violation, so we're not going to be able to do it.
That is true.
He says it because he can't walk as fast as we can.
Supervisor Groom?
I think perhaps the women are going to have to challenge the men here.
Now we'll hear from the Sheriff's Office, Chris Coe.
I guess we have to approve the resolutions. Why don't we do all of them at once, then?
I think they're all in one, aren't
We
they?
do that? Do all of them, we'll approve all,
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve all of the remaining resolutions.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Rocio?
So Chris Coe from the Sheriff's Office is here.
Thank you, President Horsley, members of the board, Mr. Byers, Maltby, and Sacco. We have 10 volunteer units at the Sheriff's Office, ranging from our search and rescue, air squadron, mounted horse patrol explorers, our SVIP group, and many more. Our volunteers donate over 33 hours of our 33,000 hours of service annually, which is a savings of close to $2 million. We have our 372 active volunteers here in the Sheriff's Office that provide a great service not only to the Sheriff's Office but to the county. Recently, in fact just last week, our BAMRU unit, one of our BAMRU members, that's a Bay Area Mountain Rescue Unit member. He was a new member just being sworn in, and he came to my office, and I asked him, Colin, why do you want to come to the sheriff's office and be a BAMRU member, and what is it that you do for a living? He was a young man in his 20s. He told me, well, Chris, I'm a Berkeley firefighter, and I'm coming here to the sheriff's office to be a BAMRU member because of the excellent training and the training that it's going to provide in my career advancement. And it's training like we don't have in Berkeley. It's amazing the type 1 type of training that they actually do. And he goes, and besides, I'm a paramedic. I have great skills as well that I will be sharing with your other BAMRU members. And, so when they go out on rescues, that's something that's going to benefit both of us, which I fully agree. It's really a win-win situation for us. Then, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before on Mavericks, it was 8:30 in the evening. I got a phone call from our SVIP volunteer, Rick. It was 8:30 in the evening, and I knew he was out at Mavericks, and I said, hey, Rick, what's up? And he said, well, Chris, I just got home. And I said, well, tell me what happened. He goes, well, I picked up the volunteer car in Millbrae, drove over to the coast. This was at 5 a.m. I had the 6 a.m. briefing at the coast. Mavericks went well without any hitches. We had plenty of volunteers. We had 70-something volunteers out there making sure that everyone was safe, no one was out at the beach and so forth. It was a great event, non-eventful. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening after we were done cleaning up and so forth. I started heading back to Millbrae. Well, he said, I exited Millbrae Avenue, just going down Hillcrest, and this vehicle in front of me hit a parked car and rolled over right in front of me on Hillcrest. He goes, well, my training came into gear. He's an SVIP patrol volunteer and trainer of mine. And he said, my training came into gear. I put my amber lights on, made sure the vehicle was safe, immediately called to dispatch, my location, vehicle description, and so forth, so they could start fire, and our deputies that were patrolling the streets on the other side of Millbrae at the time. And I went to the young girl, it was a teenager, and just told her it was going to be okay. I sat with her. It was only a couple minutes. I'm sure to her it seemed like a lot longer. It was only a couple minutes. Before you knew it, we had fire there. We had the deputies there. Everything was taken care of. I went back to my position, maintained parking control for the fire truck, made sure the Hillcrest Boulevard was open. The fire truck came, ambulance came, and the deputies did their job by starting the accident report, measurements, and so forth, calling the parents. He stayed till after the vehicle was towed. There were nobody else to do it at that time in the evening. So he stayed until the vehicle was towed, went home, and then gave me the call. And I just said, thank you so much, Rick, for going above and beyond your duty. And he said, no, thank you, Chris, for letting me be a volunteer. So that just gives you an idea of the quality of the volunteers that we have here. And they're really your biggest advocates. They're dedicated young men and women from ages 14 to 84. So we have a great group of volunteers, and I want to thank you for honoring them and recognizing them for the Star Award. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Wayman Wong from Environmental Health.
Thank you, President Horsley, board members, Mr. Maltby, Mr. Byers, Mr. Sacco. Thank you for allowing me to speak regarding the polystyrene foodware ordinance. Now, over the years, you've seen the growth of the use of foam or polystyrene foodware throughout the county, and you also see the problems that are associated with it in our streets, on our creeks, in our bay, and the beaches. So not only do we see that it's an environmental problem, we also see that it's becoming an individual health problem. So under the leadership of this board, and specifically Supervisor Tissier for passing the polystyrene foodware ordinance, which banned its use, and tasking environmental health to implement and enforce this ordinance, we're able to collaborate with all other cities within San Mateo County to adopt this ordinance. And now we have 11 cities on board and more to come. Now, with the expansion of this adoption by the other cities, we're going to see greater impacts. The more people are restricting their use, the less we'll see of that in our environment and negative impacts on people's health. Now, this also gave us a blueprint to tackle other environmental issues, namely, most recently, the introduction of Supervisor Groom and Supervisor Tissier's support of the reusable bag ordinance. That gives us a blueprint of how to collaborate with other cities to implement a strong ordinance throughout the county. So this approach not only shows the cities, but also the residents and the business community how we can work collaboratively to tackle environmental issues that don't stop at each of the jurisdiction's borders. So on behalf of environmental health, I thank you for recognizing our department.
Our final presenters this morning, Fred Crowder and David Long.
Good morning, members of the board, President Horsley, and welcome, Supervisor Slocum. This is the first opportunity I've had to be here since your election. I'd say County Manager Maltby, but John just walked out. Jim and Council Byers. I'm Fred Crowder, the Agricultural Commissioner and Sealer of Weights and Measures, and I just wanted to, before introducing David, I wanted to thank you for recognizing our department for this award, and I also wanted to thank and recognize David for his good work on putting together the our department's paperless office program. He's the one that really had the vision and saw everything coming together and was able to do it. So, so thank you, and I'd like to introduce Deputy Director David Lung.
Good morning, President Horsley, members of the board, Mr. Byers, and Mr. Sacco. A paperless office project was initiated in 2010 with the objective to reduce paper use, eliminate and minimize storage of physical documents, convert office space to usable staff space, reduce cost of printing and regulatory notice received from the state, and also to improve customer service by accessing our files faster, and in certain cases, we even allow direct access. To do this, we started the project with our Weights and Measures program. Our department acquired software and hardware to reduce the use of paper forms in the field and engage our state partners to recognize and accept electronic reports and invoices, and also utilize intern and staff to do the initial scanning and archiving. As a result of the project, we reduced paper at the source by using electronic inspection software, eliminate paper inspection forms, allow electronic submittal of invoices and state reports, and existing paper records were converted into electronic records and stored on an archiving server. Our next step will be to expand this to other programs within our department, with the goals to apply to all programs within our department. And we are also planning to implement an electronic daily time program to eliminate paper uses for the daily activity report from our staff. And I'll be glad to take any question you may have. And thank you for recognizing our program. as we continue to improve our paperless office initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the presenters. And now, last but certainly not least, we have the Employee Suggestion Award. And this year we're recognizing Garrett Dunwoody from ISD. His suggestion is to explore implementing an innovation day that allows county employees the opportunity to work on self-selected projects that contribute to the organizational goals. President Horsley will present Garrett with his commendation award. Garrett, will you join us? Thank you so much. Congratulations to all the award recipients, and a special thank you to the board and the county manager for your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Rocio. I just had one speaker on this before we conclude this. Martin Fox.
Thank you again, President Horsley, members of the board, my fellow veterans. I agree the BHRS's Office of Consumer and Family Affairs should be commended. However, only for their efforts helping people with mental illness who have the insight needed to seek treatment. The elderly mother of an adult son who was living with her at the time was also living with mental illness, and he did not have that insight when I first met her about 1.5 years ago. At that point, he had been hospitalized 3 times for psychiatric evaluation. He was hospitalized subsequently 8 more times before he was finally conserved and placed in a locked facility over in Fremont. She has limited resources. She could get out of San Mateo County over as far as Fremont. But in December, he was shifted to an assisted living center in Modesto. She has no way of visiting him. Her contact with her son has been limited to telephone calls ever since he's been moved to Modesto. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more item on this. I need a motion on a resolution for authorizing a transfer in the amount of $73,500.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Can we take a 5-minute break before we do our budget workshop? Okay. Back at 10 o'clock. Okay, let's begin the county budget workshop and mid-year update. Mr. Maltby?
Mr. President, members of the board, I'm pleased to be able to present to you today the update of the 2012-2013 budget. I'd like to begin my remarks this morning by thanking Jim Sacco and his great staff, Shanna, Michael, Deanna, and Danielle. They've really put in an extraordinary amount of work for this document, and also Raina and Peggy and Mary and all the department heads in the county that have worked so hard to bring various elements of what the county does financially into a report to the board. The report, of course, has a series of recommendations. The most important recommendation is to provide direction to us as we begin the process of preparing what will be a new budget for us in the sense of a 2-year budget that will have a number of new and different elements involved. Also, there are resolutions involving the county's open data policy and use of community impact measures. I'll have more comments on those later, but I did want to make sure that before we were through today, the board will act on the recommendations made in the report. Due in large part to the board's leadership in the fiscal stewardship of our departments and the continuing contributions of our hardworking employees, the county's financial position is much improved this year as compared to previous years. This is due also, of course, to the improving economy and to the confidence that the voters have given to San Mateo County in the form of approval of 2 tax measures in the past year. The vehicle rental tax measure last June, and of course in November, Measure A, the sales tax measure. General fund reserve levels are being maintained at 20% of the budget in accordance with the county board policy. The county continues the distinction of being the only county in the state with a AAA Moody rating from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. This is important for us as we are anticipating going into the fiscal market in the next several months to borrow money to build the jail, and of course having a AAA rating means that our borrowing costs will be lower. The 5-year projections in this report also reflect improving economic conditions. Taken with operating reductions and increased contributions from employees over several years by way of freezing salaries and changes in contribution rates for retirement and health care, we are now projecting a significant reduction in our structural deficit in fiscal year 17-18 in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million. And of course, this does not include Measure A funds or that non-budgeted portion of excess ERAF funds. The reason for Measure A, of course, is that the board could choose to appropriate all of it for new purposes, in which it would have no impact on the budget one way or the other. So at this point, it is not reflected in terms of financial considerations in this document. Obviously, it will be in your upcoming budget. Excess ERAF, of course, reflects the board's policy of appropriating $40 million a year in excess ERAF for operations and leaving the remaining amount of excess ERAF, which we estimate for the forthcoming year to be in the neighborhood of $40 million with a number of potential variables, which I will discuss in more detail later, as unappropriated funds to be used at the board's discretion or to be carried forward into the future fiscal years. In addition to the mid-year budget report, we also are updating the county's proposed community impact measures, and we have included also a revised board meeting schedule that moves the recommended budget hearings to September as we begin a 2-year budget cycle. No, I'm fine. Just as an overview of the county's fiscal status, we anticipate ending the fiscal year with about $355 million in fund balance for all funds, which is about $61 million less than the prior year. The fund balance for the general fund is expected to be approximately $237 million, which is about $43 million less. This is largely due to one-time expenditures. We've spent approximately to date $37 million on the replacement of the jail and about $9 million on various information and technology initiatives. The projected year-end balance for the general fund also represents general fund net appropriations, which are well within the 10% reserve requirement of the Board of Supervisors. They shouldn't let me have technology. It's a mistake. 2-year budget. I knew it would appear sooner or later.
Well, let's take that IT money out then, right?
Yeah, not for me. Give it to John and people that can use it productively. This year, as we begin the process of developing a true 2-year budget, I want to begin by thanking Supervisors Groom and Pine for your assistance in working with the folks that are involved in trying to develop the 2-year budget and to help format it and to make sure that we are presenting to the board all of the appropriate information that assists you in making meaningful policy decisions in the context of the budget. The 2-year budget will be for fiscal years 2013-14 and 2014-15. We hope that this process creates more time for departments to focus on service delivery and the achievement of goals and priorities, and will make the budget process more efficient. In September 2013, the board will review the 2-year budget, followed with periodic check-ins through various county managers' reports. And beginning in 2014, there will be cross-departmental performance review teams that will evaluate programs, outcomes, and productivity and compare program performance in similar organizations or benchmarking. Okay. There we go. It's a real challenge. The county's fiscal status, as I've indicated, is estimated to have the fund balances for both the general fund and for the special funds. And although you have in your budget report a percentage breakdown as to the revenues that we are projecting, we also thought it might be helpful to look at the actual revenues that are projected from 2013 through 2018. We would note in terms of expenditures during this time that we would anticipate all of the expenses that are normally associated with inflation or the cost of living to drive our costs primarily, with certain aberrations in areas, for instance, of healthcare. We continue to experience 9-10% a year increases in employee healthcare costs and for healthcare costs for retired employees. And we also anticipate being able to recognize continued savings from various lean efforts and other efficiency efforts underway in various departments that will partially, but not completely, offset those primary drivers of costs. The two largest reasons that will probably drive our increasing costs will be the smoothing of losses that occurred in 2008 and 9 in our retirement system, as well as the continuing costs, as I mentioned a moment ago, for healthcare costs. We are on a 15-year program to reduce and hopefully eliminate our unfunded liability, and I will speak more about that in a moment. But those continue to be significant costs that are driving the budget, even as we try to effect measures that will offset those increases. The assumptions that we've used for growth in general purpose revenues over the next 5 years will produce approximately $50 million in additional revenue. The one thing that you may have noticed in the percentage changes in sales tax that appears to be an aberration is that in the current fiscal year, we received a significant amount of sales tax from essentially appropriated taxes that were allocated to other agencies and for jet fuel taxes and other things. That is sort of one time, and so it gets smoothed, if you will, over the next couple of years. So while the numbers will continue to rise from a percentage standpoint, it's sort of an aberration statistically. The Measure A sales taxes we have anticipated will grow from approximately $63 million in 2014 to about $75 million in 2018, based on assumptions of past growth in other sales tax collected in this county and in the analysis performed by our sales tax consultants. So in summary, over the next 5 years, expenditures are expected to outpace revenues by approximately $7 million. Our expenditure assumptions then are that salaries and benefits will grow by $41 million, and I again due almost entirely to changes in retirement and to health care. The replacement jail costs, which the board has received briefings on in prior budgets, and there is a variance depending on whether we receive state assistance in terms of capital construction costs and in the number of beds that will be opened initially in the jail and the costs of operating the jail as a result of those beds. Countywide initiatives, the board again is aware that we have a number of countywide initiatives, and we will have a capital improvement program presented to the board in the context of the 5-year budget so that those initiatives are clearly identified over the course of the next 5 years. Contracts with outside providers, we see increases in those contracts as they continue to pick up additional caseloads in some critical areas and other increases associated with those caseloads. And anticipated deficits that we have briefed the board on in prior meetings on IHSS. We have been spending down reserves, and in Healthy Kids, a similar situation that will produce additional costs to the general fund in the out years. This particular graph, I think, is important because as we get to 2017 and 2018, we finally begin to see a narrowing of the expenditure and revenue lines. And in fact, if those assumptions were accurate and there were no other changes in the next 10 years, and that will not be the case, those lines would actually come together someplace in the 8th or 9th year. But there are always changes and assumptions that will occur. But the point is, we're moving in the right direction. We are gradually bridging our structural deficit. And this particular graph, I think, is visual proof of that fact. So as we continue to reflect on our structural deficit, there are potential solutions to reducing the deficit. We could use additional excess ERAF funds on an ongoing basis. I'm not recommending that today, but that's certainly a potential, and I know the board is aware of that. We are in the process of leasing the Circle Star towers. In fact, I'm pleased to report that we're very close to a lease on one tower. And that will produce additional revenue, and it appears that our original revenue projections that we talked about a year or so ago, about $2 million a building, appear to be pretty accurate in today's market. Certainly, continued emphasis on process improvements, the use of technology, standardization, consolidation can result in savings to our costs that contribute to the deficit solution. The reopening of Camp Kent, which would generate about $800,000 of additional revenue, will provide assistance in that regard. Again, the use of excess ERAF and Measure A to reduce long-term liabilities and therefore offset future costs represent a potential. Let me give you an example in that regard. If the board was to put aside, say, $10 million a year in Measure A funds over 10 years, and $10 million a year in unallocated excess ERAF funds for 10 years, that would be $200 million over the course of 10 years. And that would produce, we believe, based on present retirement assumptions, a savings of about $16 million a year by the 10th year in hard dollar savings. Well, if you go back to the chart on our anticipated deficit, which is about $21 million, and we could save $16 million or save $16 million, that's a $5 million difference, which in what will be by that time a $2 billion budget is essentially budget dust. So we would be very close to eliminating our structural deficit on that one action alone if the board was to take that action. So that's by way of example what the potential use of excess ERAF and Measure A funds could contribute. I wanted to spend a little time, and I know it's in the county manager's budget report, so I won't repeat it, but I'll talk about it now, and then when we get to the county manager's report, we'll simply deal with the other action items. As always, we receive hundreds of millions of dollars a year by the state, and the county's financial future is inextricably linked with the future of the state of California, for better or worse. And we've had the opportunity, with the good work of Mary McMillan and Connie and the department heads who have contributed so much to an analysis of the governor's budget. We think we are beginning to understand the scope and the consequences of the budget proposal, remembering, of course, that what the governor proposes in January seldom looks like what the legislature adopts in June. In fact, it's almost a remarkable difference. You're wondering if you're dealing with the same state and the same budget in the space of 5 months. But having said that, what we have to go on now are the outlines of the governor's proposal. So the state budget is essentially $100 million, and it projects essentially $100 million in revenue with a $1 billion reserve. It also dedicates about $4 billion to paying down what the governor has called the wall of debt. And it increases funding for K through 12 education, and it begins the process and the expenditures connected with that of implementing the Affordable Care Act. Certainly, with the approval of Proposition 30 and the improving economic conditions throughout the state's budget is considerably different than it was this time last year. But the governor still warns that there are considerable risks that the state faces, and certainly decisions made in Washington regarding expenditures and revenues and raising the debt ceiling all will have potential consequences on the economy and therefore on the state budget. There are a number of important policy proposals in the governor's budget. First and foremost is the reform of the current K through 12 funding formulas. The governor is proposing collapsing the K-12 revenue limits in most categorical program funding into one formula. And this would allow a new base grant that would vary by grade span and be supplemented for districts with larger concentrations of low-income students, English learners, and foster care children. The proposed new funding formula, while not completely understood at this point, if adopted, could have significant negative consequences on the county's receipt of excess ERAF revenue. Let me again stop and continue to reinforce this point. Excess ERAF are property taxes that were allocated to cities and counties and special districts prior to the 1990s that the state then diverted to help fund schools and at the same time decrease its obligations financially to schools. Essentially, schools receive no new money. The state just offset its obligation under Proposition 98 of funding schools. So although we designate this source of money as excess ERAF, I want to emphasize that they're local property tax dollars. They're not some magical money that has just appeared the state has graciously allowed counties to use. They're in fact our own dollars, and they've being spent in accordance with a very specific formula that was adopted by state law a number of years ago. So if the results of the governor's education proposals were to reduce the county's excess ERAF, that is in effect saying we're taking additional property tax dollars away from cities and counties and special districts. So I wanted to be real clear about that. And even though we call it something a little bit less than property tax, it is in fact our local property tax dollars. For the county in 2013, the budget brings both good and bad news. It certainly holds the line on further spending reductions to critical health and human service programs, and that's good news. It also projects healthy increases in revenues to the 2011 Public Safety, Health, and Human Service realignment accounts, and that is good news. And it proposes increased funding for employment services provided through CalWorks program and county Medi-Cal administration costs for counties as a result of the shift of children away from healthy family programs to Medi-Cal. Also good news. Problematic, in addition to the potential impact on excess ERAF, is the administration's state-based or county-based option proposals for the expansion of Medi-Cal eligibility to non-disabled childless adult population up to 138% of the federal poverty level, which is part of the Affordable Care Act. This is problematic because there are potential fiscal risks which, like much else with the Affordable Care Act, are simply unknown. And up to this point in time, we have continued to use the operating assumption that the Affordable Care Act will have no negative consequences on the county financially. That continues to be the case in this report, but we are concerned with what the state will eventually adopt and how it may impact the county financially, and the health services system is continuing to analyze that, and we will update the board as additional information becomes available. So we will continue to monitor the state budget and the various appropriation bills as they move through the process and provide your board with periodic updates on all of these issues. Regarding our community impact goals and outcomes, we have listed a number of these in our report. It's still a work in progress. These are goals that the county, in some measure, sometimes in greater measure, sometimes in less measure, can influence their community measures. And it allows us to measure as a community overall how we're doing in meeting our large objectives of making this a healthier, a safer, a more prosperous, a more livable, a more environmentally conscious community. No one agency, in fact, all of government together can achieve these goals. It requires the entire community working together that will achieve these results. But by being able to measure these on a consistent basis and present that information to the board, it allows you the opportunity to see where there might be new collaborations that could be appropriate, that helps move us toward achieving those goals, where new county policies might be appropriate in helping us move toward achieving these goals. And we will continue to refine these measurements based on their usefulness in the years to come. One of the things that we believe is important, and we have presented in a separate resolution to the board that allows us to track this information, is an open data policy. And we have a separate memo that has described the reasons that we think that is important, and a resolution that we are recommending that your board adopt that will help us to develop this information and make it available to the entire community on a consistent and ongoing basis. Of course, there are a number of tables that are attached to this report that allow you to see the context for us making the assumptions and recommendations that we've made today, and I will be delighted to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions? Supervisor Pine?
Thank you, Mr. Maltby, for your report and the memo. Just a couple questions and have some comments later. Just refresh my memory. In the fiscal year, the current fiscal year, I believe we appropriated more than 50% of ERAF. I think it was 65%.
I believe that's the case. It was done explicitly on a one-time basis.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit? I noticed in the memo that in the past we use reserves or excess ERAF, or kind of the same thing, to pay down healthcare liability. Could you tell us a little bit how that worked? And because there's some parallels, I think, with what you're suggesting is one option for the board to pay down pension.
Right. I believe, and Jim can correct me, I believe that we used excess ERAF, in fact, to fully fund or fund 90% maybe of the employee retirement health care prior to the crash of 2008. So we were one of the few counties that actually had almost 100% funded retiree health care. And of course, a portion of that was lost in the crash, and we were building it back, but we still have unfunded liability. So that was an example of one potential source of using excess ERAF as a one-time expenditure to pay down a future obligation and thereby reduce future county operating costs.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk to you more about that offline because I think it might be interesting to learn from that. I had a question and I guess a request about the jail financing. I think it'd be really helpful for the board to have a spreadsheet or some kind of have all the jail costs in one place, because the jail costs are obviously a big part of our out year expenditures, and it gets really complicated because of the fact that a lot of it is capital, and then there's operating expense, and there's kind of two versions of the operating expense, and we may get state money, we may not get state money, so it has such a giant effect on any projection of the so-called structural deficit that I think it'd be very helpful to try to capture all those costs, historic and future.
What we'll do is we'll update the memo that we sent to the board this fall, which provided those two scenarios and fleshed it out with the costs that have been spent to date in each of those scenarios and expected costs in each of those scenarios going forward.
Okay, all right. Those are my questions for now.
Any other questions? I just have a couple. The fiscal year actually ends June 30th, and we begin a new one in July. So how do we do that before the budget is in September?
Right.
Magic. The law allows the board to, the purpose of the budget adoption before July 1st is that we can't legally spend any money unless the board appropriates it. So what we've always done is we've done the budget in June that provided the appropriations, and then we wait on pins and needles for the state to act, and then eventually the federal government to act. And so we come back in September and have sort of a mini replay of the budget in June. The way around that is simply to take the current year's appropriated budget, and in June, in an item that could be a consent item on the board agenda, to adopt that budget for the forthcoming fiscal year as a means of appropriating spending for the first 2 or 3 months of that fiscal year in accordance with what you have appropriated the prior fiscal year. And then, of course, in September, when you adopt a new budget, that becomes the budget for the remainder of the fiscal year and for the next 2 years, in fact. With a 2-year budget, you don't have to go through that the second year because you've already adopted the budget for the forthcoming year. So every other year, we would simply recommend rolling over the prior year budget for a couple of months so that we could continue to have the authority to spend money and operate programs. And then the board can have a comprehensive look at the budget after all of the information is available from outside agencies that affect our budget.
Thank you. Yeah, other question I have is you are sweeping reserves from departments. And I understand that gave me a quick explanation of that, but there is supposed to be one of the reasons that it was set up in the first place was that a department was encouraged to save, and then they would be able to keep 75% of their savings. That incentive is now at least temporarily gone. How do you now set up a requirement that they save something out of their budget? I do understand what you're doing, but
first of all, I want to clarify that we're just making this as a suggestion at this point. The idea needs to be fleshed out, and I think there are individual circumstances in different departments that need some work. But to step back to 1993-94 when we adopted the policy originally, the economy was growing. We wanted to provide an incentive for departments to save money and to be able to use that money for one-time purposes or for those programs or projects that would either generate new revenue or reduce existing operating costs. And so long as the budget grew, that worked just fine, and we were able to accumulate significant reserves. After the recession hit and we were going in the opposite direction, a number of departments, particularly those that couldn't generate revenue, often in criminal justice areas, they started running what we call structural budget deficits. And our calculation for that and the county's overall structural budget deficit became increasingly cumbersome to the point that I almost killed Jim Sacco when he tried to explain it to me a few months ago. It made no sense. And so the system needs to be retuned. We certainly need to provide incentives for departments to save money and not spend money. And that has to be built in with whatever new system we come up with. But we also have to have a way that departments that have this so-called structural deficit that we continue to fund every year, so there's not really a deficit. We need to do away with that confusion. And so I want to talk to I introduced it to the Executive Council yesterday, and some department heads have expressed some concerns. I want to talk to them about that and come up with a new system. So the system has to be changed, but I'm certainly open to the means to do it, and we'll bring that back in the next couple of months as a recommendation to the board.
so you haven't really figured out yet that
No.
like a target for savings.
Right.
The other thing is that I'm talking about borrowing money for the jail. Are we also including that for building fire stations or a fire station?
Well,
Is that part of it as well?
As the board may recall, in the current year's budget, we have money approved for the construction of the new station at Skylanda.
Yeah, right.
Skyline. We built, the station in the Highlands and the station at Cordilleras continue to be functional and with probably some minor improvements, will continue to serve us well. The Pescadero station clearly needs to be improved or replaced and rebuilt. The problem is that continues to be in the flood zone. Till we fix the flooding, it doesn't make sense to build a new station there, and it's sort of a catch-22. But as soon as we've got the flooding problem solved, and I know you're working on it, President Horsley, and so you could tell us when we could build a new fire station there, because we need to do it.
Now. It looks like it takes a long time. The other question, I don't really understand how the deficit, I guess IHSS I kind of understand, but Healthy Kids program increasing to 6.9 million by 2017, 2017, 18. I thought with the Affordable Care Act would have taken care of that, but apparently not.
No, there are still a number of children in our county that are not covered under the provisions of the act, and that's always been the case. And you know, and I know this board it's preaching to the choir the board recognizes, but it's a matter of living in a healthy community, and regardless of your legal status or how you've come to live here, if you live here, all of us are affected by people that have healthcare problems, and so you know. Disease doesn't reflect your immigration status or your age or a number of other factors, and so that's why we continue to recommend funding of that program.
Well, if they fix the immigration problem, perhaps that'll help us. Supervisor Tessier, do you have a question?
Not really a question. I just wanted a couple comments. I kind of like where you're going, John, on this idea of looking at the departments, what their leftover pots and all. I guess the thing that's always been troubling is, you know, things just weren't transparent enough to know exactly what we have in our budget and exactly where the monies are going. And also, I think what's going to be helpful is having this data for us to take a look at the outcomes and be able to measure them. And when I looked at the community impact goals and outcome measures, you know, although I understand what you're doing, so for instance, on healthy and safe communities, on, you know, it says reduce crime, it says different things, reduce recidivism, 911 safety calls, response times. In looking at all that, are we also going to have some categories where we look at sort of the realignment results? I mean, I know
absolutely.
that sort of falls under recidivism because you're hoping they don't come back,
Right.
but there's also, you know, really being able to measure, you know, how that particular program is doing in the sense of people may not be coming back through, but are we actually getting them the help they need as far as housing, mental health, you know, alcohol and drug, you know, how is that going to fit into the reducing of crime?
Right, and you know, this is a work in progress, as I mentioned earlier, and I think maybe some of these measures aren't appropriate and won't work, and we need other measures that aren't listed here. And in fact, I've listed several just for the sake of discussion with people that have been working on this. But you know, I think it's going to take a while till we find a sweet spot of what are the measures that are really defining this, that we have good data for, and that we can benchmark well. And I think this is a good first effort, but that's what it is. It's a first effort. So we're certainly open to suggestions and changes as we go through this.
And the other thing is, I think what you also mentioned is we don't want to disincentivize our departments. I mean, they work very hard, you know, for them to have a little bit of cushion makes them feel comfortable. And I guess it'd be good as you go through this is to really try to figure out what could be some good incentives for them,
Right.
so that they don't feel like, you know, all we're doing is constantly pulling things away from them.
Right.
Because that always seems like you're you know, no good deed goes unpunished type of thing. So anyway, those two things really struck me. I actually like the way you've sort of laid out looking at the budget, you know, over the next 5 years and how we're actually going to get closer, just not even including Measure A or ERAF, because that's going to really, I think, help us say, you know, if we set aside this amount of money, here's what we really have to work with. And I think that's also going to help us zero in on those gaps we talked about, areas where we think we really need to take a hard look at. And I do think having this kind of information is really going to help us get there this year in a completely different way. So I really appreciate the efforts that went into this.
Supervisor Groom?
Thanks, President Horsley. I like the idea of exploring how to be without reserves in the department, but making sure that the departments have the revenue to attack things when they come up unexpected. So I think that we're on a good roll there. I'm very much in favor of the open data. I think that, and I would make sure that we added to add to Supervisor Tissier's list a prevention column of some sort, because I mean we all know that you spend it on the front, you don't have to spend it at the back end, and we've got to be better, I think, at acknowledging the prevention efforts that we do and making sure that they're well enough funded. I haven't quite made up my mind yet, but I think that I'm much more in favor of using ERAF to help fund our liabilities and not Measure A money. I think that the public really voted for Measure A to enhance programs and to create new programs that we need and to backfill the programs that the state was busily cutting from us. So I guess that's just my initial thought, and as we discuss that further, I think our opinions will evolve. But and if there is a concern or a fret that ERAF is going to go away, let's use it quickly and early, and not get caught sort of in the Redevelopment Act and other things that have happened to local government. And but I too, I really like the 2-year budget concept. I think some cities have started to use it, and I think it's been effective. I like the check-in periods on a regular basis. And President Horsley, I don't know if we want to have a quarterly budget update or an every 6-week budget update, or there may not be anything to update, but have it on the agenda so it's constantly on our mind. But I think this is excellent work, and I'd like to thank Mr. Sacco and his team as well.
Supervisor Slocum?
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me compliment first Mr. Sacco and all the staff who put this report together as a new supervisor. While I did have some questions, it was pretty understandable, and I appreciate the hard work that went into making it. So, Mr. Maltby, as the new guy, heard you say a couple of new words for me: budget dust and smoothing. I do have a couple of specific questions that are sort of burrowed down in the details, but I see Mr. Walton has left, but perhaps somebody could just talk briefly about what is open data, what does that mean for residents, and what does that mean for departments?
Perhaps Raina. Oh, there she is.
Good morning, board members, Supervisor Slocum. So on open data, it's really an effort to make all of we hold on to a lot of data sitting in the different systems in the county, very siloed approach. And so what this does is it creates an environment where we can actually take that data and put it out to the public. Only the ones that we can. So there are privacy issues, there are sensitivity issues. So we wouldn't put all data sets out. We would create an open data committee that would make sure that it's appropriate to post the data sets before releasing them. We would have an open data manager in the Information Services Department that would work with departments to make sure that the data sets are available. So it essentially creates a more open government, a more transparent government, and that's what the policy is for, and that we recommend your support.
Just two more quick things. Mr. Maltby, on page 2, it says $9 million on major IT initiatives, ATKS, Advanced Scheduler, and some others. I'm assuming that the $9 million is just for those systems that are in the parentheses and would not include tax cycle changes and so forth and so on. Thank you. And then finally, I was just curious if I could have an update on the electronic patient records at the hospital, because I recall you speaking some months ago about the fact that there might be $10 million to be saved if we moved in that direction.
Gene Frazier's coming up to do that.
Thank you.
Good morning, Supervisors. Thank you for the question about electronic health records. We are in the process so we have electronic health records in certain areas of our practice. We have an outpatient record and pharmacy record and in some other areas. What we are lacking at the medical center is an inpatient record, and that is what we are implementing, what we're in the planning stages now. We should be implementing later this year. I do not believe that electronic health records on their own save money. In fact, what you typically see, and we have experienced this as well, is that the change in the workflow, in fact, reduces revenue in the beginning because everyone has to get used to doing work in a different way. Where there is revenue attached to medical records is that we are required to meet certain milestones in terms of implementing electronic health records, and there are funds coming from the federal government if you meet those milestones. And I'm sorry I don't remember the amount right now, but it is in the millions of dollars.
So, over $5 million, as I recall,
Yes.
a year.
Thank you.
Okay, just like one more question for you, Gene. You know, there's been some stories in the national press about electronic records and people speculating that, putting aside any government incentives, that that they actually in the long run are not making the system more efficient, which is totally counterintuitive. I think the argument, or there's some of the experiences that they're leading to more procedures being done, or I don't know if you had any comment on that. I'm sure you've seen those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. What essentially happened is that RAND came out with a study, I don't know, about 6 years ago, claiming these massive savings from electronic health records, which they've now come out with a study saying, oops, we may be overestimated. Where I think we are in the life cycle is that healthcare is really an industry, and I'm going to be blunt, and I hope I don't offend my colleagues, but we are really, I would say, probably in about where most of the rest of the world was in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So we have such an enormous gap we have to get over. Electronic health records are helping us, but what you really have to think about is that doctors and nurse practitioners have really practiced as artisans, but as we move to having more evidence-based practices, we have to actually incorporate those into the way we practice. And so we're having a cultural issue so that's one issue that we need to. It's the whole lean principles of standardizing work, really determining what is the best practice, and then getting everyone to do that, which is harder than you think. On top of that is adding the electronic health records. If we can move to a much more standardized system, electronic health records will be an extraordinary asset to us, both because it will help us do the kind of research that can't be done now to continue to improve best practices, as well as enabling us to target particular patients, because certain patients follow the 80-20 rule. We have certain patients who are terribly ill, have many different co-occurring conditions, and if we can find them early on and help them prevent, frankly, getting as bad as they currently are in our system, then there are large savings to be had. But we've got two things going on: electronic health records as well as a cultural change in medicine to be much more standardized, and there's some pushback against that.
Jean, does the medical records, does that also help us in our medical billing situation, since we have to code everything a certain way in order to get reimbursed for things?
Yes and no. As we've talked about at the hospital board, electronic records in the end are a reflection of decisions that are made. So if we make the right decisions, and so that when a doctor or a nurse practitioner clicks a particular button to say this is the kind of exam that I'm doing, and that attaches to the right thing in the billing service, then yes, it makes it better, but we also hard code errors. So that's, if we make a mistake, then everybody who might have been doing it right in the past is actually doing it wrong. So they are not the panacea that one would hope. They take an enormous amount of work to, one, implement, and then two, to optimize.
One more comment?
Oh, I just had some comments on the budget in general.
Oh, okay.
Unless there's other questions for Gene.
Go ahead, make your comments.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments. First off, it really is remarkable and exciting to see how our fiscal situation has improved so markedly. I mean, I recall distinctly when I was campaigning for office in 10-11, there was $80 million structural deficit. And when I joined the board, which seems like yesterday, it was a $50 million structural deficit. And, this fiscal year, it's $14 million. So this is all without, of course, measure A. So that really is a remarkable change. And it does give us a lot of flexibility and a time to kind of recalibrate where we are and where we're going. And when we think about that remaining deficit, I would not want to use any more ERAF on that. You know, I think the 50% policy is sound. I think that, in my view, you know, using Measure A to deal with that deficit would be appropriate. And I actually think that deficit may be lower than maybe lower than we currently think. But I could see using Measure A for that, and would still have plenty of Measure A left over. You know, as I've spoken about previously, I'm very supportive of the county manager's idea to use reserves and ERAF to pay down some of these liabilities, particularly pension liability. You know, our reserves now are over 20%. We have some flexibility there. You know, we've done it successfully in the past with health liability. We've seen Marin pay down some pension obligations, and you know, it's real operating savings if we pay down liabilities, and it'll make a big contribution towards the structural deficit as well. So, you know, I'm eager to continue to look at that. Just a couple other quick things. I think we'll have to really keep a close eye on the health reform situation. I mean, we're all hopeful that it will be neutral. Actually, when I was campaigning, I told everyone to be positive. So I guess it's neutral now is where we're hoping it's going to be. And we'll have to keep a close eye on that. It's just a hard one to predict. And the open data is terrific. You know, it's time for San Mateo County to have a hackathon and get some people involved with looking at our data and seeing what we can learn from it. And finally, as to the metrics, you know, two thoughts on that. You know, one thing I really liked about the memo was the 8 or 10 pages where we see all the kind of high-level indices of kind of the health of our area. You know, home prices, affordability, foreclosure, you know, office space, and then, you know, we get into all kinds of things internally, jail populations, Peninsula Works, on and on. This is great to have all this data here in one place. And because again, it gives us kind of a sense for the environment in which we're working, both kind of at the macro level and then a little bit down lower within our own the county functions. So, you know, I think it'd be a great service and very helpful for us as policymakers and for the public in general if, you know, this was on the web, and presumably it'd be pretty simple to just update it. Because then you could see the trend lines. You know, you could see, well, what's happening to the jail populations, what's happening to people using emergency rooms. You know, not necessarily as a tool to evaluate our performance, just kind of keeping track of that overall environment. So, I mean, I think this is really, really good data for that purpose. And then when we get down to the last set of data that was discussed in Ms. McMillan's memo, you know, again, I'd like to try to put down as things that I have a more preference for trying to measure things that we affect. So I kind of see, again, two buckets of data. Kind of the data that defines the general environment, and then data that where we really are in control. Like, you know, a couple I think we're all very concerned about, like uptake on the fresh, I'm forgetting the name, the fresh, not food stamps, but the CalFresh. Thank you. Or changes in recidivism, or so anyway, that's how I look at these data dashboards.
Okay, we have a couple speakers. One of the dashboards that concerned me had to do with child abuse referrals. It's really a dramatic increase, and so as Supervisor Grimm pointed out, with Measure A, I think we got to look at is there something we can do to? I mean, it just is alarming how dramatic that has increased. In that case, the two speakers we have first is Colin Haney or Heaney, and then followed by Martin Fox.
Thank you very much, President Horsley and members of the board, Mr. Sacco, Mr. Maltby, Mr. Bears. I'm Colin Haney. I'm the Deputy Director at Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. I'm here today to ask that as we're considering fiscal year 2013-2014 budget, we consider creation of a position that can help make the county a healthier, cleaner, more connected place, that of a countywide bicycle coordinator. Most of our neighboring counties have such a staff position. Whether or not they're called countywide bicycle coordinator or not, their job is to oversee implementation of countywide bicycle plans, establish guidelines for bicycle facilities that are constructed in the county, help municipalities coordinate when building bicycle infrastructure that crosses jurisdictions, and perhaps most importantly, bring funds into the county and, for construction of bicycle projects and oversee their distribution. The importance of this last role was highlighted last week when a countywide call for bicycle and pedestrian projects as part of the One Bay Area grant process was undersubscribed to the tune of over $2 million. The staff at CCAG does an excellent job at securing and awarding funding for many transportation projects throughout the county. But without a dedicated staff projects, often bicycle infrastructure seems to fall through the cracks. A dedicated bicycle coordinator would be a valuable step towards realizing the goals that CCAG and its Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee set forth in their own countywide bicycle and pedestrian plan. And so as our area works to implement State Senate Bill 375 and the community goals that we just saw, it changes the way that it plans for growth in transportation. It's imperative that the county has the foresight to bring someone on board who has the skill set to help keep residents of San Mateo County mobile in a more sustainable and healthy manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Mr. President, if I can, Mr. Haney, just so you know, although I haven't gotten as far as I wanted to, I started before Rich Napier left CCAG to start talking with them. I've been talking with the county manager and a few others about putting a group together to talk a little bit about what is it CCAG's actually doing. They have a person that supposedly spends half time on bicycle issues, pedestrian issues, things like that, to see, you know, what they're actually doing and what other things we could potentially do. Because I agree with you, there's a lot of money there for different issues at MTC in particular that we may not have applied for or haven't gotten far enough to apply for it, but I also don't want to duplicate things that CCAG is doing. So we either have to do it through CCAG or decide we need to do something in-house. So I've talked to several different people, and I'm actually going to be convening a meeting to talk just about that. What are we doing? What more can we do? It's all part of that healthy community. So I don't want you to think we haven't done anything. We just haven't gotten this far because we've been working on a few other things. But that is on my agenda for the coming year.
I appreciate the update. Thank you.
And Martin Fox, you have about 4 slips here. Can you do at least 3 of them? One is for, there's for 4A, 5A, and 5B.
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, President Horsley. And thank you very much, Mr. Maltby, for pointing out the fact that the property taxes are excess EBRAF in another form. There is also something else that I would like you to consider when you're taking a look at your budget. Step back and take a look at the special funds that are available. I know we had quite a discussion about the general funds, but when you go through your program approval process, you will find that the net county cost is often affected by special funds, like the Mental Health Services Act, which is currently being audited for its misuse of funds, and the audit was even called for by one of the authors, State Senate Pro Tem President Darrell Steinberg. So I would respectfully request that the budget process address in some fashion the effect that those special revenue funds have on the county budget. That was my comments on the county budget workshop. I wanted to thank County Manager Maltby for letting us know that, and letting the public know, that the California Public Records Act mandate is reimbursable by the state. It's my understanding that the state owes us in excess of $623,000 as of last July. And I think that I've seen improvements, and I think there is room for more improvements in engaging the public. Can I leave number 6 until later?
You want to do number 6?
I can do number 6.
Well, okay. That's
because Dr. Peter Linoff was 42 years old when he passed away alone in his apartment during the early morning of January 2nd. He was a captain in the United States Army from 2003 to 2008. He was one of 350 clinical psychologists in an army of about 500,000, when he started treating some of the troops that were first deployed to Iraq and returned to Fort Hood, Texas in early 2004. He himself was deployed as the mental health officer in charge of the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division in and around Baghdad from August 2006 to August 2007. He was awarded the Bronze Star at the end of his deployment. He was divorced from his wife of 17 years and ended up with being awarded a 100% PTSD-related disability in 2009. He began working at the Santa Cruz County Vet Center in Capitola during late 2009, and he co-authored a paper on professional burnout among his peers that was published in an American Psychological Association journal in 2011. He remarried, but decompensated and was eventually terminated by the VA. His widow is profoundly frustrated by his suicide and has said, "We didn't know how to get him the help he needed, despite having a 100% disability rating." Please vote to implement Laura's law.
Thanks, Marty. Now we have do we have a motion to, for the
Can I just,
resolution?
make one comment about the Mental Health Service Act? I'm sorry.
Sure, you can, yes.
I just want to, express that, our behavioral health department has provided this board with very detailed information about the use of the Mental Health Services Act that has shown how well it's being used and effective it is. While there has been some press about potential issues at a state level, I just see none here, and I think we're doing a good job with it.
Thank you, Supervisor Pine. We do need a resolution for the county manager, or directing the county manager and the CIO.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Now, the county manager's report.
Yep.
Mr. President, if all of the items A through G were included, could the record show that all the items A through G were included in that motion?
Yes.
Certainly.
Thank you. Regarding the county manager's report, I've already reported on the state budget. We would ask that you adopt a resolution improving the legislative program for San Mateo County and a resolution waiving requests for proposals and authorizing a one-year agreement with Political Solutions for state advocacy services in the amount of $157,500.
I would make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'd like to make one comment, if I may, Mr. President.
I have one too.
I want to thank the legislative team for working so closely with the Youth Commission this year. They have wanted to be involved in legislative recommendations and have not quite gotten that done, but we worked out a system this year with Gina from my office and Connie, and so it's included for the first time now in our legislative workshop, and that will make the Youth Commission feel a real part of the process.
Thank you, Supervisor Grimm. Supervisor Pine?
Yes, just two comments on the legislative agenda. I may have missed them, but there's two things that I think we want our advocates to keep an eye on. And one is reducing the thresholds for local finance. Obviously, that could change things substantially for the better for us. And the other is changes in CEQA. I'm not sure where we're going to come out on that, but that's also a big issue that will be under consideration. So just two things for the team to keep in mind.
Any other comments, Supervisor Tessier?
Just again, as Carol did, I really want to thank the county manager's staff working on legislation, Mary, Connie, others. They've worked really hard in helping us with the jail financing. Now, we still don't know whether we're going to get it, but we were able to get the idea of reimbursement, which makes a huge difference. It lets us move forward knowing that we're either going to get it or not get it, but if it can be reimbursed, we keep the process going, and that's really critical. as many of you know, there's a lot of activity in our community right now, and it's going to make it harder and harder if we don't stay on target to get the actual workers that we need for the project. So we're just moving forward, but they've done an incredible job in Sacramento, and I also want to thank our legislators that have worked. We are very fortunate to have the representatives we have in Rich Gordon, Jerry Hill, and others that, you know, no matter what the subject is, they're helping us with, whether it's the ERAF issue, the VLF issue, this financing issue. And the good news is they sat here where we sit today, so they know what we're going through. So they know it inside and out. So we've been very fortunate, and our legislative team really works very closely with them and has done a tremendous job. So I really want to thank them and Marshall as well, who, you know, make sure we get out there with some press to make sure that people are paying attention to all this as well. So I just want to make sure they hear that, even though they're not all here.
Okay, now it's board members' reports. Supervisor Groom?
Thanks, President Horsley. I have the sad duty today to ask us to adjourn in memory of Evelyn Stanton. She, very, very long time member of our community. She was, for many, many years, the executive director of the San Mateo County Mental Health Association. 1979, she took that position and worked for many years helping us to understand mental health in this community, helping to set the stage for building housing for those who were mentally ill, working with them so that they could get the proper treatment. She had a long career, though, in San Mateo County before she began working at the Mental Health Association, active in the American Association of University Women, very, very active in the San Mateo County League of Women Voters. I think she was president a couple of times. Woman of the Year from the San Mateo Seroptimus Club, and in 1987 she was elected to the San Mateo County Women's Hall of Fame. She served on many boards of directors, including Mills Peninsula, the San Mateo Health Foundation, and the Family Service Agency. So she also of Poplar Center, which is now Community Gate Path. So she's contributed volumes to the not-for-profit world in this county, and was a good, solid citizen. And her family is not having services, but she can be remembered by making a contribution to the charity of your choice, especially in a mental health area. So I just ask us to adjourn in Evelyn's memory.
I have one adjourn in memory and then a couple other short items. I'd like to adjourn in memory of Richard Batigla, who was the former treasurer of South San Francisco, and he had a long career of civic contributions in that city and throughout the county. He had previously been a council member and mayor, and had just served in a wide variety of capacities as chairman of the personnel board of South City, served on our Colma Creek Flood Board, chairman of the South City Housing Authority, very involved in Italian-American citizen groups. So he was a real foundation in South City and a great contributor, so we adjourn in his memory. Two other points. I just want to recognize how excited I am about this Code for America initiative that we are announcing on two levels. First off, we talk a lot about innovation in government, and this is a real example of us doing just that. Someone on the team took the initiative to apply for these monies, and we were successful in getting them. And now we're getting a handful of really bright technology folks to look at how we provide our food resources and deal with hunger in our county. So I'm very excited about that. And then finally, on a lighter note and another positive note, I think many of us probably saw that a home sold in Woodside for $117 million.
All right. Did you buy it?
Well, I passed on that one, but I will say that by my calculations, that's another $260,000 to the county. 22% of 1%.
All right. Great. Supervisor Tessier?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple things. This past Saturday, as many of you know, we had our gun buyback held at the event center. We ended up with an extremely large crowd. Before we even opened at 10 a.m., we had 75 cars waiting. Some people were waiting since 8 o'clock to get in. I guess they were afraid we were going to run out of money. We brought in 680 guns. We paid out $63,500. And this cash was donated by extremely generous personal and corporate donors. And just so you know, 24 of these guns were assault weapons. So we did manage to take in all kinds. It was unbelievable. I don't know, some of you probably saw those stacks of guns you saw in the paper, but I really want to thank the committed employees of the Sheriff's Office for their diligent work Saturday and for the days leading up to it. You know, we decided to do this about 1 week prior to actually doing it, so it wasn't a lot of time for planning and preparation, but they did an incredible job. We had many people come up to us and indicate how organized it was, and even though some of them had to wait well over an hour to get through the line, it was phenomenal, the turnout that we had. I'd like to thank the following donors: Joe Kachette, Lucky Chances, First National Bank, Recology, Lucille Packard's Children's Hospital, and Bill Butler of Butler Construction, and Congresswoman Jackie Spear. They all made contributions to the Sheriff's Office, which in turn we used to purchase these guns. I'd also like to thank Chris Carpenter and Dana Storr in the event center. They really jumped in that day. We had so many cars, it was backing up on 92, and they just got out there and started directing traffic. They used some of their extra security. We had a lot of people from the Sheriff's Office there, but unfortunately it just was much bigger than we had originally anticipated. So they really went above me on the call of duty. I'd also like to thank some of the individuals that were really responsible for really organizing it with my office, and that was Captain Tom Gallagher, Lieutenant Tim Reed, Captain Quinlan, Sergeant Fanato, Lieutenant Mark Robbins, and the range supervisors that were there were extremely critical. They did an incredible job. And I'd also like to thank Lorraine Simmons from my office. She had it so organized and ready to roll that we were able to accomplish this within a week, so I do want to thank her for that as well. And on a sad note, I want to inform you that Greg Monk's mother died last night. Her name is Goya Monks, and we don't have any additional information, but if we can keep his family in our thoughts and prayers.
Supervisor Slocum? Well, I say I have about three to adjourn in memory of. One is Kalawanti Bakri, and she was actually born in India, in Punjab. And she has three sons. She actually was a woman that was illiterate in India, never had any schooling whatsoever, did not speak English, but came to the United States with her sons, who pretty remarkable family, and they do a lot for the Indian and Pakistani community in both San Mateo County as well as Alameda County. She almost made it to 100 years old. She was born in 1913 and passed away January 22nd, 2013. The other person I'd like to adjourn in memory is Sherry Laser. Sherry sang at my wedding with Elaine and I many years ago, off key, I might add. And she was a real character. She's a great friend of my wife. And in fact, Elaine spent time with her fairly recently. She worked at IBM. She wrote a couple of books. They were not bestsellers, although Elaine treasures them. And she is survived by her daughter Melissa and Melissa's husband Matt and her granddaughter Natalia. And the other person is Howard Davis Boone. Actually, I knew Howard for many years. He passed away January 14th, 2013. He was 93 years of age, and he was actually a native of Iowa, and he started his education in a one-room schoolhouse, and he rode to school every day on horseback. Got a degree in agricultural economics. He ended up working for Cargill. During the war in 1941, he joined the Navy Air Corps. He was an aviation cadet. He was sworn in just after Pearl Harbor, and he met his wife, Nancy. One of the things I knew about Nancy, I knew Nancy as well. She was really active with the Service League. And, I don't know if maybe people don't know this, but in the Sheriff's Department, they do allow people to get married in jail, so when they go off to state prison. And Nancy was an ordained minister, and she worked with the Service League and did a lot, and she used to perform weddings for people in jail. She was a really kindly, wonderful woman. In any case, Nancy and Howard traveled all over the world. And he moved to Woodside in 1960. He was a member of the Mounted Patrol, the Trails Committee for the town, did a lot of things in the town of Woodside. And he was the captain of the Mounted Patrol at one time. And he was, in 1994, he was given the Outstanding Horseman's Award by the San Mateo County Mounted Patrol. And that concludes my report. We are going to adjourn, well, actually, we're going to take a 10-minute break, come back for pictures, and then go into closed session. So it gives the camera people a little bit of time to set up for group photo. So, okay, 10-minute break. Okay, we're back in session. Mr. Byers, can you report on the results of closed session?
Yes, gladly, Mr. President. The board did meet in closed session and did consider and discuss item A and B1. Did not consider or take up items B2 and C. And with regard to items A and B1, there was no action taken.
Thank you. With that, a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Adjourn.